It's 1:05. I'd like to begin, so let me say shalom. I'm Anise Parnes, president of Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island region of Women's League. On behalf of our region, welcome to the 8th annual Helen Cytryn Study Day. It's wonderful to be Yachad together again for this springtime BQLI region ritual. We're delighted to see so many familiar faces, and I'd like to acknowledge a few of them now. Debbie Kainer-Goldich, our Women's League International President, Rabbi Ellen Wolensfield, Women's League's Executive Director, Barbara Ezring, Women's League's International Torah Fund Chair, Margie Miller, who hails from the beautiful BQLI region, our immediate past Women's League International President, our past BQLI region presidents, Ray Schessler, Vivian Lieber, and Sharon Shorten, North Atlantic Region President, Esther Lichtenstein, Mid-Atlantic Region President, Lori Snow, and longtime Women's League leader and friend of BQLI region, who's zooming in from Philly, Mimi Pollack, and from my spiritual home, Rabbi Moshe Sachs. This is the point in the program when, if we were in person, I would say, now let's give a warm welcome to our visiting scholars, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, Rabbi Eric Citron, and Jewish Theological Seminary rabbinical student Grace Gleason. You can clap anyway, even if we won't hear you. Lastly, I'd like to...
I just see her in the Zoom meeting, Anise is on.
Would you please mute? Lastly, I'd like to recognize the Citron family. Thank you for supporting us and reminding us of your mother's passion for lifelong learning. You honor us by joining us this afternoon. So here we are, biyachad, together, via Zoom, just like last year. At that time, when so many activities were being canceled, we chose to be together, to learn together, embracing Helen Cytryn's dream of a day of scholarship like what she experienced when she took classes at JTS. Barbara Kaplan, our Region Torah Fund Vice President, and Karen Seltzer, a past Region Education Vice President, have planned a study day in which we will reflect upon a year of Zoom Judaism, to borrow an expression from Rabbi Eli Garfinkel. I don't know about you, but I can't wait for this program to begin. Barbara and Karen, thank you for your passion and dedication towards the success of this program, Women's League and Torah Fund within our sisterhoods, our region, and our international organization. Toda Rabbah. And thank you, our members, for joining us and generously donating to Women's League's Torah Fund campaign. Now, it's my honor to introduce our Women's League International President, Debbie Kainer-Goldich, who will share a few words with us. You want to unmute, Debbie?
Yep, I sure do, Anise. Little trouble there unmuting. Thank you
no
so
problem.
much. Thank you so much, Anise. Good morning, BQLI. I am happy to be with you today. I am particularly happy to be with you today to honor the memory of Helen Cytryn. I have a distant memory of her when she served as an NGO to the United Nations for Women's League. In the past, I have Googled her and found out that she was a Pennsylvanian for a short while like me, and also a registered nurse like me. It makes honoring her today even more meaningful for me. I would like to recognize Anise Parnes, the BQLI Region President, and Barbara Kaplan, BQLI Torah Fund Vice President, for their efforts to perpetuate Helen's memory and to continue with this day of study. I would also like to thank them for inviting me here today. I believe that this is my 4th time on this special day. And I would like to recognize the members of the International Torah Fund Cabinet from BQLI region. They are Gloria Cohen, Tema Kingsley, Maxine Leibowitz, Ruth Lowenstein, Margie Miller, Marcy Schechter, Bobby Schleicher, Lisa Schlesinger, Janet Tobin, Sharon Shorten, and Lauren Wishnu. And of course, we remember Evelyn Seelig of blessed memory. These women work tirelessly on behalf of Torah Fund. They serve on committees and help to make decisions and set policy. Thank you for your service to Torah Fund and to Women's League. You may all know that as members of Sisterhood, you are also members of the International Organization of Women's League. Women's League is the umbrella organization over all the sisterhoods in conservative synagogues in North America, and BQLI is one of the 13 regions which encompass all of those sisterhoods. As members of Women's League, through the magic of Zoom, all of our members can join in on programs all over North America. We have programs that include cooking with Paula Scheuer, Peloton rides, health and wellness programs, sessions that share programming ideas, membership ideas, and Torah Fund ideas. And every day we have a service at noon where almost 70 women say Misha Berach, recite Monas Kaddish, and study Pirkei Avot, led by Women's League Executive Director, Rabbi Ellen Wolins Fields. We call this gathering Makom B'Yachad. For more information on that, please read our weekly newsletter called Women's League Week. It lists many other opportunities for learning and engagement. Everyone who belongs to Women's League can join any and all of these programs in any sisterhood in North America and some in Israel. If you do not receive the weekly newsletter, please put your name and email in the chat and I will subscribe you. Thank you again for the opportunity to greet you today on behalf of Women's League and Torah Fund and to honor Helen Cytryn. As Jews, we understand that it is our tradition to donate tzedakah at the most important times of our lives, whether that is a celebration to honor someone or to mourn a loss. Today, we have the opportunity to raise funds and donate tzedakah for Torah Fund for both of those reasons. Shalom, and I look forward to being together with you, biyachad, in person next year.
Thank you, Debbie. And now I'd like to introduce Barbara Kaplan, our Region Torah Fund VP.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are Zooming from. Thank you, Anise, for your opening remarks, and thank you, Debbie. Now that you're back in Pennsylvania, we're on the same time zone, and it's always a pleasure to have you visit the BQLI region. I'm Barbara Kaplan, the Torah Fund Vice President of the BQLI region of Women's League. I want to welcome everyone to our 8th annual BQLI region Helen Cytryn Study Day. It's a pleasure to be together, or biyachad, the theme of our annual Torah Fund campaign. Later in the program, we will be hearing from Rabbi Eric Citron, son of the late Helen Cytryn. Helen believed strongly in education, which was reflected in the 30-plus years she attended classes at JTS that was specifically for Women's League members. The BQLI region honors Helen's legacy of leadership, selfless volunteerism, unwavering support of Torah Fund, and lifelong learning by dedicating this day of study in her name. For the past year, many members of Women's League, including women in the BQLI region, have learned together, but not in person, but on Zoom. Hence, the title of today's program is Zooming In on 2020, Reflections on the Year Through a Jewish Lens. We will also have the pleasure to learn with Rabbi Amy Eilberg. As you will find out later, she was the first woman ordained as a conservative rabbi from JTS. But at this time, I want to introduce Grace Gleason. Grace is a third-year rabbinical student at JTS. Grace currently serves as a Marshall T. Meyer Rabbinic Fellow at B'nai Jeshurun in Manhattan. Grace is a passionate prayer leader. She previously served as a Rabbinic Fellow at Mishkan Chicago and Shilhat Zibor at the New City Jewish Center in New City, New York. Grace combines a love of teaching, song, personal healing, and Jewish text in her rabbinical pursuits. Originally from the Chicago area, she earned a BA in Interdisciplinary Studies from the University of Chicago in 2014. Grace will present a Devar Torah and tell us about her Jewish journey and how Torah Fund has made an impact, a difference in her life. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you for welcoming me into your community. I'm really honored to be here, and it's an honor to learn later from Rabbi Eilberg, who is such a wonderful role model, as well as Rabbi Citron, who I met at Camp Ramah in Wisconsin when I was a Jewish educator, and your son was the director, and to be honoring Helen Cytryn Zichronah Livracha. So as Barbara said, I want to just take a few moments and talk about my own journey of how I came to JTS and how the Torah Fund has supported me as a rabbinical student. I grew up in Chicago in a very secular family, and I didn't go to Hebrew school or have a bat mitzvah growing up. And my mother, Zichronah Livracha, passed away when I was 8, and her family was very Jewishly traditional. So I grew up going to, with my aunt, going to the Orthodox shul in Skokie, Illinois, where she lived, where I became very fascinated with Judaism, though it wasn't practiced in my home. And when I was in college, I met a fabulous, fabulous teacher, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, who I went to her talk about her personal history of coming out as a lesbian at a time when JTS was not ordaining gay students, and her account of the history of the Talmud as a model of how we can respond to personal crises in our lives, and how studying Gemara can be a healing and liberating and empowering practice. And Rabbi Eilberg said to me, just learn the Aleph Bet and you can start learning Gemara in the original Hebrew and Aramaic. So I was very interested in and learned the Aleph Bet, started going to her classes, just looking up one word at a time, and completely fell in love with studying Talmud. It was so empowering for me to gain ownership of even a short text from this text that I thought I would never be accessible to me to actually read and understand. And my experience of personal empowerment and the spiritual practice of text study in a chavruta and the mentorship of Rabbi Eilberg led me to want to go to rabbinical school and to be engaged with facilitating this same process of empowerment for others, particularly those who are disconnected from Judaism. So I needed to do a lot of work in order to be prepared to apply to JTS, which is where I felt most drawn to. So I spent a year studying at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, and then applied to JTS. And I just completed my 3rd year. I actually have a final later this afternoon, and then I have one more, and then I'll be done with my 3rd year, which has been entirely online. And the scholarships that were provided by the Torah Fund are also one of the major reasons why I chose to go to JTS. They've been tremendously helpful to me. As somebody who has a lot of loans from my undergrad degree, I was very nervous before starting school about taking out more loans and the financial aspect of going to rabbinical school. And the scholarships made it accessible for me to attend JTS, and I wouldn't be here without them. So thank you very much for your contributions to the Torah Fund. It's really valuable, I know, also for many of my classmates. And before I close, I want to share a few words about this week's parasha, Parashat Acharei Mot Kedoshim. And this is the parasha that's at the very center of the Torah, because it's in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, which is the 3rd in the middle of the 5 books of the Torah. And Kedoshim is the middle parasha of this middle book. And it's fitting that this parasha is at the very center because it deals with all the ways that we as human beings can manifest holiness, Kedusha, in our physical and interpersonal world. The practice of elevating and revealing holiness in our everyday, very human actions, such as eating and speaking to each other and in relationships and in the way that we care for the dying, is at the essence of Torah. It's not the Mishkan, which came before, and all of the theatrics of Revelation, but at the center of the Torah is these human relationships. And to me, this is also a very fitting parasha for this event and for sharing my story of how I came into rabbinical school, because one of the things that has motivated me is to be in a role of being part of life cycle events and infusing moments of transition in people's lives with the wisdom of our tradition and with holiness. And at the beginning of Kedoshim, the name of this parasha comes from the 2nd verse of Leviticus chapter 19. which says, Daber al kol adat b'nei Yisrael, va'amarta alehem kadoshim tihiyu, ki kadosh ani Hashem, Elohechem. Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, God, am holy. And Rashi comments on this verse that it could have said just B'nai Israel, just the children of Israel. Why does it say Kol Adat, the whole community of the children of Israel? It's to emphasize that these laws are not specific to the Kohanim, to the priests, and holiness is not in the domain of just religious leaders or who we traditionally think of as religious leaders, but it's in the domain of all Jews. And we remember that in viewing each other as vessels of holiness. So with that, thank you so much for having me and for your support of the Torah Fund, and feel free to reach out to me. I will put my contact info in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, for your inspiring message. Please keep me posted about your studies and career, and I hope to be at your rabbinical ordination in 2 years. Our next speaker will be Rabbi Eric Citron, who was the spiritual leader of Bethel Temple, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, from 2003 until his retirement this past June, and now he lives in Jerusalem with his family. Rabbi Citron, this is the third Helen Cytryn study day that I am chairing. 2 years ago, you drove to Long Island and you spoke about Judaism and our neighbors. Last year, you Zoomed from Harrisburg, and your topic was not simply your mother's hesed, the models of our matriarchs, reimagined for today. And this year, you are Zooming from Jerusalem and will reflect on what might my mother think about Zooming to class. And it's my pleasure to present Rabbi Eric Cytryn.
Hi, everyone. It's really an honor to be Zooming with you. It's a strange reality. I would be Zooming anyway. I would have sent a video tribute or something. It's possible my brother would be there, and very possible my son would have been there if the virus wasn't still so rampant throughout the world. So it's a real honor to be on Zoom. I just wanted to remind you, I think last year I showed these pictures. My mother met my father when she was a nurse, and this is a picture of my mother as a nurse in her nurse's uniform. Most of you didn't know her way back then. Not even the late Evelyn Seelig, who was one of my mother's oldest friends in Women's League, knew her then. This is my mom soon before she passed away. Our grandchild, our old Sam, and that's Sam is now 10 years old. So that was 2011. You know, I was asked to respond to the impossible question. And the reason it's impossible is because my mother was one of those technologically very, very challenged people who I thought about a year ago when we all went on Zoom, when most conservative synagogues decided to Zoom services, at least during the week, if not on Shabbat. In Harrisburg, we did Shabbat and holidays as well. We had to provide iPads or other devices and instructions to many people who were my age and older, how to download Zoom, how to push the link in the email, how to make it work. And then, as Anise was doing earlier, how to encourage people to mute at certain times and unmute at certain times. For those of you who might have known my mother, she was never unmuted. she always let us know what she was thinking. She did not suffer fools gladly, and she was also had very strong opinions. I appreciate the fact, I think it was Gloria who mentioned her job as an NGO at the United Nations for Women's League. She had stories to tell about the behind the scenes craziness when the UN voted Zionism was racism, and when they rescinded that, and all of the Israel issues that the United Nations went through in the 70s and 80s. My mother was there with Adele Leaf, may her soul rest in peace. She was not someone who would push the mute button voluntarily. My mother was a schmoozer. She loved being in the room with people and talking to them and meeting new people. She loved Women's League conferences, Women's League conventions. She loved going to different communities like Harrisburg, where she went with both Joan Friedlander, may her soul rest in peace, and Corey Schneider, who may she live and be well, were very active with Women's League and Torah Fund. And she led conferences all over the East Coast. She loved interacting with people. I think she would have, if she had to adapt to the Zoom, if she had a grandchild or a friend pushing the button and making it happen, I think she would have appreciated Zoom, because without Zoom, she would have been totally isolated. And most people I know here in Israel, I've been taking 2 classes. One of them is totally on Zoom. The other one started out on Zoom. It's a course on interfaith dialogue in Israel with a wonderful rabbi named Ron Kronish. That is now meeting. We're now meeting face to face with people, because in Israel we can do that. But if my mom was still around in Pennsylvania, she would have learned how to work with Zoom. She would not have been happy working with Zoom, but she would have learned how to do it, because it would have been the only way that she could continue to study Torah. It would have been the only way that she could continue to have connections to those who she loved and who loved her, including but not limited to her family, her nieces and nephews, her 2 sons and daughters-in-law and grandchildren. But so many friends from Women's League, from the Israel Community Center, the late Israel Community Center of Levittown, and also from Bethel Temple in Harrisburg. She would have adapted. I just want to end with the following story, which I actually just told my colleagues on RavNet. My grandmother, Ella Goldweber, who has many, many people named after her, including me. My name is Eric. Ella Goldweber came here with her 3 sisters because her mother had passed away, and her father was remarrying a woman whose father paid for the daughters from the first marriage, the children from the first marriage, 4 daughters, to be shipped off to America. And so Ella Goldweber came to America. She landed on Ellis Island right when President McKinley was assassinated, and she had to spend an extra week or 2 or 3, we don't know exactly, on her ship and on Ellis Island, because they were checking immigrants. Sound familiar? She came here a young woman. 5 or 6 years later, she met a new immigrant from Warsaw, Frank Goldweber, who was a socialist agnostic Jew, and they got married. And Frank Goldweber had, I think, 4 children from his first marriage, and I think together Ella and Frank had 8 children together. My mother was the youngest, born in 1921. And throughout my mother's life, she carried this story with her of adaptation, learning how to go from Marmarush Saget to New York, to live in the Bronx, right off the Grand Concourse. She learned how to adapt during the Great Depression. She learned how to adapt. She dropped out of college and ended up going into nurses training so she could help to earn a living to help support her parents, who were by that time already, I think, sick and dying of cancer. Both her parents died within a few weeks of each other, her father and her mother. She adapted all sorts of other elements into her life. She was a nurse through and through. She knew nothing Jewishly, right? Her Satmar mother had not been able to really teach her anything except some laws of kashrut. My mother learned everything from my father and then from the professors at JTS and from local rabbis who were wonderful. Levittown, Long Island, Farmingdale, Long Island, Wantagh, Long Island. There were a lot of great rabbis in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and they're there now. There are great rabbis there now too. But when my mom was just beginning to learn, Rabbi Eli Chavivi's mother taught my mother how to read Hebrew because Moshe Chavivi, Eli's father, was the first educational director at my synagogue, the Israel Community Center of Levittown. So my mother was, it seemed like she wasn't going to adapt to anything. If you talked to her, she was very stubborn, very set in her ways. But on the other hand, she adapted. She adapted many, many things. And I think she would have overcome whatever hesitancy she had about technology, and she would have embraced it because it brings people together, especially at this time. And my mother, you know, as a nurse, knew what pandemics were. She, thank God, was born after the flu epidemic of 1918-19. But she was someone who thought on her feet, and she would have really loved the way people have found technology bringing people together and allowing Torah to be taught. Whether it's from San Francisco, whether it's from JTS, wherever it's from, she was a student of Torah. And I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to share some of those thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for sharing the memories, pictures of your mother. And I hope that you have these stories written down so this will continue through the next generations. And I hope you're enjoying your retirement, and it's wonderful that you have your family present as well. And actually, every afternoon this week, I'm on a virtual bus tour of Israel with my synagogue, and I'm going to be visiting Israel later. Who would have expected that so many of us had to adapt to Zoom learning? At 12 noon most days, I try to attend Makom B'Yahad, the Women's League program, which includes the Mishabera, Daily Psalm, Kaddish, and Teaching. Since November, we've been learning Pirkei Avot. Before that, we learned all 150 Psalms. And Women's League celebrated with a program on November 6th titled Cultivating Hesed for Ourselves and Others. And it was presented by Rabbi Amy Eilberg. I'm so excited to have Rabbi Eilberg as our featured speaker. Her topic will be Musar Wisdom on the lessons of 2020. You will have the opportunity to respond to questions using the chat feature. Terry Fields will monitor the chat for comments and questions, and she will present as many of the responses to Rabbi Eilberg as time permits, but please remain muted.
All right.
Rabbi Ellen Walnuts Fields has been the executive director of Women's League since May of 2018 and the first rabbi in that position. Rabbi Ellen serves on many committees and is the Women's League representative to the Conference of Presidents of major American organizations. Rabbi, I enjoy your weekly words of Torah, and I always look forward to Makom B'Yahat since last year as we studied Psalms, Pirkei Avot. And at this time, I present Rabbi Walnut Field, who will introduce Rabbi Amy Eilberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you very much. I just want to add that the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, I'm not the representative. Debbie is with me. Over the past couple of years, I've been the only one to be able to go on the mission, but Debbie's actually the organizational representative to that organization, the Conference of Presidents. So it's very humbling to be in the presence of so many of my colleagues. Rabbi Citron has been a mentor to me over the years, and he introduced me to Excedrin migraine, which thank God I don't need to take anymore. And I bet he, sitting in Jerusalem, I hopefully doesn't need to take that anymore either. He's coming back. Nope, exactly, right? It's the best thing not to.
No more migraines.
Excellent. It's good. So my purpose here today is to talk not about migraines, but about the woman who has helped me not have them, is Rabbi Amy Eilberg, who is my hero, my mentor and role model, my colleague and friend, my inspiration. And it's truly an honor to be able to introduce you today. Rabbi Amy Eilberg is the first woman ordained as a conservative rabbi by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. She serves as a spiritual director, a kindness coach, and peace and justice educator. She recently served as the coordinator of Jewish engagement for faith in the Action Bay area, a multi-faith, multiracial social justice organization in the San Francisco Bay Area. Prior to that, she served as the director of the Pardes Rodef Shalom Pursuer of Peace Communities program, teaching Jewish civil discourse to rabbis, synagogues, and Jewish organizations. Her book, From Enemy to Friend, Jewish Wisdom and the Pursuit of Peace, was published by Orbis Books in March 2014. She received her Doctor of Ministry degree from United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities in 2016. She's an adoring mother of 3 and exuberant savta of 2 baby grandsons. And it's always a pleasure to be able to introduce you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Always a delight to be with you, and a little embarrassing to hear your over-the-top praise. Speaking of heroes, you have offered extraordinary leadership to your community over the period of this year and a half. Community meeting every day for prayer and song and study all through this time.
Thank you.
Extraordinary leadership. I'm actually embarrassed to say that, I was happy to hear that Rabbi, my old friend Eric Citron, was going to be on the call, but I didn't make the connection. I didn't understand. I go, oh, good, Eric's going to be there too. Eric, I didn't know that Helen Cytryn, Zikron Ali Bracha, was your mother. But of course, it makes such total sense of so much I know about you and your family. You and I have been friends for about 45 years, if I have the math right. What a legacy, and I only know a little bit of it. What a legacy that your mother left through you as a Jewish educator and Jewish leader. Especially, again, the part that I know, your son, Jacob, who's also been a really important mentor to my stepsons, Eitan and Jonah. So the impact on my family, going back to your mom, I'm sure has been really significant. So it's wonderful to be here today. I'm very grateful for Zoom, so that I get to sit with you and talk with you about something that I've been thinking about deeply all year, and I'm sure that you have some things I've been thinking about, and I'm sure that you have as well. I love the title, by the way, Zooming in on 2020. That's quite brilliant. What a year it's been. Some of us look back and we had personal losses of our own. It wasn't just the global issues. I lost a dear cousin this year. I have friends who lost parents and spouses, and I'm sure in a group this size, there are other personal tragedies and losses that have been a major part of this year for you. for some of you, but for all of us collectively in the United States and around the world, it has been truly remarkable, painful, difficult, challenging year, especially with the pandemic, the challenges of the pandemic, and with the racial reckoning that came in its wake. And in a very real sense, it's, of course, who knew the timing would work out this way. In one sense, 2020 ended yesterday with a very positive verdict of having the man who killed George Floyd be brought to justice in a way that it wasn't a sure thing. So in a sense, yesterday was the end of the year. And although there's a lot of work left to do, I planned this, but I moved to say Shehechianu for that moment of justice and collective relief that we all experienced yesterday with the verdict. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu l'zman hazeh. Blessed are you, ruler of the universe, who has given us life and sustained us and enabled us to reach this day. A teacher of mine, Sylvia Borstein, said some months back, really during the height of the pandemic, we really could be saying Shechianu every day. That's not halachically correct, but spiritually really true that every day, every night, my husband says as we pray before going to sleep, I'm grateful for our health. So very early in the pandemic, like just before we hit the point of shutdown here in California, I was on a webinar in which a master trauma healer in Bethlehem actually was on a webinar. And he said that he had, since the pandemic had begun to bubble up, he had been looking at himself in the mirror every morning. His name is Sammy. Been looking at himself in the mirror every morning and saying to himself, how am I going to be different when this is all over? And how are all of us going to be different when this is all over? That question has been the central question in my own reflections and in my teaching over the course of this year and a half that someday we'll remember as the multiple challenges of 2020. So my desire today is to share a few thoughts about what we've been learning during this period. And I'm focusing especially on the challenges of the pandemic and the challenges of heightened awareness of racial inequality and racial injustice that we've been grappling with as a nation. What have we been learning, or that's a hopeful statement, what I hope we've been learning, and how should we be continuing our learning when the challenges of 2020 are past us. So since the beginning, I felt that the way to approach that question was through the wisdom of the Musar tradition. As I'm sure some of you know, Musar is an ancient system of Jewish spiritual development that draws on biblical and rabbinic texts and then really becomes a movement in the 18th century. It sort of lived in ultra-Orthodox communities for some time, and then in recent decades has experienced a revival among non-Orthodox Jews and has provided tremendous sense of meaning and Jewish connection to lots of Jews. So jumping forward, one key concept in Musar that's if not entirely unique to Musar, is given a unique framing in Musar. And that is a concept called hitlamdut. Maybe be helpful if I put it in the chat. so you can see it. I can even type in Hebrew. I could type it in Hebrew, but anyway, there it is in English. And if you can see, if you look carefully at that word, you can see that Lamed, the LMD, Lamed Mem Dalet. This word is from the same root as Lilmod or Talmud, the verb for studying or for learning. Hitlamdut, because of its grammatical form, suggests a kind of self-reflective learning, or about learning about oneself. So one of the most beloved Musar teachers of the 20th century, Rav Shlomo Wolbe, said that the most important thing about Musar study and practice is hitlamdut, which is to say, to develop a way of living that is about learning from everything. He has all kinds of beautiful ways in which he expresses this. Oh, let me bring up a text. Don't get scared, I have lots and lots of texts on this handout. We're not going to remotely have time for all of them. But here's my definition: hitlamdut, attentive curiosity, or a way of life based on commitment to ongoing personal learning and growth. So if you think about every moment, relating to every moment of life as an opportunity for learning, and apply that to a very difficult year, a year of losses and fear and challenge, you see what a dramatic and important teaching this is. There might well have been times during this year that our goal was to survive, that our goal was not to get sick, and for loved ones not to get sick. And of course, as human beings, that was part of our response to the challenges of the pandemic. But from a Musar perspective, the challenge of this year, aside from keeping ourselves safe and helping other people stay safe, of course, is what can we learn from this that we can take with us after the pandemic has passed? Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, very renowned scholar and teacher in the Musar movement in the 19th century, said hitlamdut is a great and rich subject to which we must dedicate at least one half a year of practice. That's really minimal. It's really more than that, in my opinion, until we become learners, mitlamdim. That is to say, that's who we are. That's how we relate to every moment of life, is as learners. And he's talking not just about learning text, but about learning about ourselves in the context of the challenges that life gives us. So it's not as a specific midah or quality of soul like compassion or strength or truthfulness. It's a way of being for the practitioner of Musar. If we came only to this in our practice, only to this idea that my primary spiritual work in life is to learn from everything that life gives me, Dayenu, he says, that would be enough. If all Musar practice brought us only to hitlamdut, this would be a great accomplishment. And stepping back, leaping back in time to the Mishnah, and probably to a much more familiar source, the very famous Mishnah in the 4th paragraph of Pirkei Avot, in which Ben Zoma asks, Ezeu Chacham, who is wise? And this is the Mishnah, this is a rabbi writing, this is a rabbinic text. So obviously the answer to the question, who is wise, is someone who knows a lot of text, right? Someone who knows a lot of Torah. Later, when the Talmud existed, someone who knows a lot of Talmud, right? The person who's wise is a scholar, right? That's the rabbinic answer to this question. Except the Mishnah gives us a twist. Against the background of what it knows is the intuitive answer to the question, but it says, no, it's not about book learning. Wisdom is one who learns from every person. The language is halomed mikol adam, but as some of the commentators understand it, the teaching really is the wise person is the one who learns from everything. And so my question for you and for myself is, what have we been learning? So here are some of the things that that I've been thinking about. I've been teaching and reflecting on a number of the qualities of soul, or midot, that are highlighted for study and personal practice in the Musar system. I want to share just 3 of them today in the time that we have, and that is anava, which is humility, just so you can see the words. Second one is savlanut, which means patience or forbearance. If you know the contemporary Hebrew word savlanut, it's related to that, but not precisely, as I'll explain in a moment. And chesed, loving kindness. So among the things that I hope we've been learning, and the learning that we'll take with us, not yay, I'm vaccinated. I mean, I am vaccinated. I am very, very happy. And I can travel to see my grandchildren again. And that is so worth, and have Shabbos dinner live with my friends. Of course, that's worth celebrating. And as I've heard people say, I don't want I don't want this crisis to have gone to waste. I don't want all the challenges of this year, the opportunities of this year, to not be well used. And that depends on our learning and taking forward the learning that was necessary for us to just make our way through the year. So one of the core experiences for me and for many people I was in conversation with during the year, especially when when we were locked down, or when the restrictions were really severe, had to do with anava. Anava means humility. But not in the kind of contemporary mind. Humility may remind us as humiliation, as if humility is really low self-esteem. And in the Musar system, it's not that. Humility is right size. That is to say, taking up the right amount of space that I'm entitled to as one human being, not more and not less. Noting that in the amount of space that I take up, and the amount of time I talk when there are other people listening. I mean, now I'm taking up all the space, but that's because you asked me to, right? The amount of oxygen I breathe in when there are actually other people around who also deserve respect and attention. I need to find the place of balance, not on the one hand, being so sort of careful that I never express my opinion in a conversation, or never really step up and bring my gifts. That would be kind of low self-esteem, nor a kind of arrogance, which is just assuming that in any situation, I'm the one whose needs matter and other people's needs don't matter. Anava is the balance. But it also includes this sort of shocking realization that we don't have as much power as we sometimes think we do. It's an absurd example, but the grocery store example, I did go use the grocery store live throughout the pandemic with masks and gloves and all of that. And I remember that it was quite challenging, and sometimes would evoke a spike of anger in me when I got to the grocery store and I saw there's no toilet paper. There are no napkins. There are no paper towels. There are no mushrooms. And what I'm making for Shabbos dinner is mushroom quiche. How am I going to make my favorite mushroom quiche without mushroom? And then quickly realizing, I can't control this. Something is happening that's so much bigger than I am. It didn't feel good. It made me feel vulnerable. Of course, there's this microscopic little virus thing that's brought the whole world to its knees, and even is preventing me from making from making me the dinner that I wanted to make. So it has been a time of tremendous vulnerability and uncertainty, which is to say, we like to think of ourselves as powerful. It feels good to feel powerful and skillful and competent. Not during the pandemic. We had a lot less power. Even the scientists had less power than we wish they had. Just to share a text, I'm going to go through these very quickly. The book of Deuteronomy brings us a beautiful, really very powerful expression of the delusion of invulnerability. The delusion that we have all the power we need and everything we accomplish in our lives is all because of what we've done. Just summarizing this text, God is saying you're going to go into the land. It's a beautiful land, and you'll eat your fill, and you'll say Birkat Hamazon, and you'll have herds and flocks and wealth. When that happens, here in verse 14, beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget God, who freed you from Egypt, who led you through the wilderness and so on, who fed you with manna. You're going to forget when you're in this beautiful land filled with so many beautiful things and starting to really like flex your muscles and build your houses and conquer peoples and all of that. You're going to say to yourselves in verse 17, Kochi ve'otzem yadi asali et hachayil hazeh. My own power and the might of my own hand have won this wealth for me. Look at me. Look how strong and accomplished I am. It's sarcastic, or it's, I don't know whether to call it a caricature, because I so recognize it, right, in myself and in so many people. We so want to think that everything we've done, if I write a paper, it's as if no one else in the world has ever said this before, or none of my teachers had anything to do with how I came up with this, right? Everything we do is a function of the people who have helped us in the gifts that God has given us. So that's the the opposite of humility, and a biblical expression of a posture of humility. In beginning of Genesis 22, when God says to Abraham, Avraham, and Avraham, not yet knowing that what God is going to ask him is to sacrifice the beloved son for whom he waited for decades. What does Avram doesn't say, well, I don't know, tell me, like, what is the task that you have for me? Avraham says without hesitation, Hineni, here I am. I'm here for you. This is God speaking, right? Our understanding is that Avraham knows that it's God calling out to him without a moment's hesitation. I mean, we may question this when we find out, and Avraham finds out what is the task that he's being asked to carry out. That's a posture of humility when I know that it's God calling to me. If I were to know that it were God calling to me, what I think, what I wonder, what I have my analysis of the situation, my particular opinion, that doesn't matter. What matters is it's time for me to say, Hineni, I'm here. And we all have Hineni moments in our own lives. And we step up in those moments, not because we're so great, but because we know that this is what's being asked of us. So this experience of humility, and I would also say, in terms of the racial justice component of this year, I'm looking around the room. It looks to me like most or all of the people in the room here are white. I think it's been very, very challenging for many of us who are white to really understand the depth of pain that people of color in America, excuse me, in general, and Black people in particular have had. We've had all kinds of judgments about the pain that Black Americans in particular have expressed. Sometimes we've critiqued their actions and their words without really understanding, without really knowing that there's really no way for us to understand fully what it's like to be a Black person in America. So we've been called to humility in that sense as well this year. Midah number 2, the trait number 2 that I think has been key to the experience of this year is savlanut. As many of you know, savlanut is the regular Hebrew word for patience in the temporal sense. Of course, Israelis have this paradoxical way of saying savlanut, which has kind of an attitude in it, kind of an obnoxious, like, wait a minute, like, don't bother me. Why are you pushing me? Savlanut means patience in the temporal way. You're keeping me waiting. Why are we being held on the phone for so long? Why is the medicine that I ordered from my my online pharmacy taking such a long time to be refilled? But all of those things, that's impatience. But in the Musar system, it's not just about time, like you're keeping me waiting, or this is taking me too long. It's taking too long, but it's also, it's hard to find the right English word to translate it. The best word I know is forbearance, which isn't a word we use very often, but it's a quality. What's helpful to understand this element is when you look at the word savlanut, the Hebrew speakers in the room will notice the SVL, samach bet lamed, means to carry a burden. A porter, if you get to the airport at Ben Gurion, and you want to pay someone to carry your luggage, that person is a sabal. So savlanut is a quality of being willing to bear burdens. That is, responding with a certain amount of grace that life brings us burdens. There's an alternative. We can respond to life's burdens and challenges with outrage, with anger, with judgment, and with blame. This is so hard. Why is this happening to me? Right? It's very, very common. I'm making fun of it in my tone, but it's, very natural sort of reaction. I don't want this to be happening. Savlanut is a wiser and more spiritually attuned attitude toward life's challenges, which is to say, you know what, I'm a human being and I'm finite, and human life is finite, and human life is full of challenges. So there really is no point raging about the things that are hard. Better for me to bring my energy and the whatever wisdom I can muster to thinking, how can I learn from this moment, or how can I help other people in this moment? How can I respond to this moment of challenge with wisdom? And the Torah says, and the Musar masters emphasize that savlanut is a trait of God. I have here beloved text, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Er Chapayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, that we chant over and over again, particularly on the High Holy Days. Let's see, do I have it here? Yes, I do. My new favorite Jewish book. Someone invited me to, Rabbi Debbie Wexler in Baltimore had a series at her synagogue in which she asked a bunch of different rabbis and Jewish educators to each give a session on their favorite Jewish book. Favorite Jewish book? That's not an easy question, right? So what I chose was the Tomer Dvorah, which is a 16th century, written by 16th century Kabbalist and Musar master Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who basically wrote a whole book about God's qualities of soul, God's kindness and compassion and patience and commitment to truth and so on. And forbearance is one of those qualities. And then Cordovero says, well, this is what God is like. This is what we're supposed to be like. So just a tiny snippet from the Tomer Dvorah. This quality of savlanut, or forbearance, is a midah, a quality of soul that people need to acquire. Forbearance, to be able to withstand insult and still not withhold your goodness from the other. I ask you to read insult not only in the ordinary sense of someone said something nasty to me. That's one of the meanings of insult, I think. But sometimes life insults us in that sort of why is this happening to me? That sort of pain that's given to me, and I'm so tempted to respond with anger, frustration, resentment. Instead, Cordovero says, just as God. So picture this. There's a whole beautiful explication of this image that I'll try to convey to you. The angels are watching God sitting in heaven, as it were, wherever, as if God sits in any particular place, looking at the creatures that God has created, particularly the human creatures. God did this extraordinary thing of giving life to the human race. What do we do with that gift of life? We do some good things with it. We do many good things with it. We heal the sick. We clothe the naked. We educate ourselves. We develop our minds. We do lots of good things with that gift of life that God gives. We also do terrible things with that gift of life that God has given us. So the angels say, God could very reasonably, actually a human king who like gave a huge gift to someone and saw them grossly misusing it, the king would say off with their heads. God, by rights, could have said, it's the breath that I gave you that you're using to commit all these terrible sins against one another. I'm going to stop giving you that gift of the breath, and we would all stop breathing. We would all die. That would be reasonable, imagines Cordovero. That's what a human king would do. But the King of Kings, as it were, the ultimate ruler of all, I imagine, takes a breath, looks down, feels the frustration, feels the anger, feels the grief, sometimes as we do with our own children. I mean, my children are extraordinarily wonderful, right? But there have been moments when we have to suffer the pain of our kids doing things that are painful for us. Do we allow ourselves to lash out? And, sometimes we lose it, whatever, we're human beings and we react badly. But the goal is to respond with, okay, how can I take this insult, short of, this doesn't apply to abuse or, really extreme harm, then the path of wisdom is to say this needs to stop. But when it's just kind of something that hurts, something that I wish weren't so, the path of forbearance is to say, you know what, I can take this and move on. And how can I take this experience and have it contribute to my own learning and to my own doing good things for the people in my life and for the world. This may be an odd thing to, an odd text to juxtapose with Moshe Cordovero, but some of you may know the famous, I think really beautiful statement by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow: if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. That brings me back to racial justice again. If we could really understand what a person like George Floyd, may he rest in peace, what many people have experienced because of living in a nation that still has embedded in it gross racial inequities. We probably wouldn't rage about why are they so angry and why are they still angry after all this time, and why can't they just focus on what we have in common and move forward. No, if we really understood the sorrow and the suffering that others have experienced, we would open our hearts more. And finally, I know that my time is almost up. I have a clock here to keep myself on track time-wise. I have it here on this handout. It's typically my favorite midah. And apologies, Ellen, I asked you to send me one of those beautiful chesed pins. I have it upstairs. I should have worn it today. I hope that the pandemic was an unforgettable 1.5 year long lesson in kindness. Something about us humans, I know it's true in my experience, but I don't think it's just me, that at really big events, in the midst of dramatic events, particularly tragic ones, our compassion and our kindness flow very naturally. At a funeral, at a Shiva home, in the midst, we learn that a friend is in the ICU, a time of serious illness, just after 9/11. I felt it in the early days of the pandemic. It's like when I did my walk around my house, because I was, pretty much the only place I could go. I sort of felt in myself, and I thought I saw in the eyes of people, that we were all sort of looking out for one another, looking at one another as if to say, I understand that this is hard. It's wordless. Like I didn't have a big conversation with everybody, with each of my neighbors, but as I was walking laps around the neighborhood, but I felt that there was something in the energy between us in which I was saying to them and they were saying to me silently, I ache for you. This is really a hard time. Here we are together. I care that this is happening to you, just as I care that this is happening to me and to all the people that I care about. We're going to get through this. Like we're sort of sending each other what my spiritual director called love notes. Did you have, in my neighborhood, there were children who were out of school, made drawings and wrote little encouraging messages in multicolored chalk on the ground. So I'd be walking my laps and I would see, we're going to be okay, or hang in there, this will be over soon, or we love you, right? So we were sort of moved to offer that to one another. And I can't resist. Some people are saying, you're being unrealistic, sweet, but unrealistic. But I can't resist the hope that humankind will be changed, irrevocably changed, by having been brought to our knees at this time, particularly the pandemic with death, the possibility of death and illness in the air. And with this so unsettling, confusing, dislocating new set of questions about what kind of country is this, and how is it that there were things happening here that I didn't really understand or take seriously before. All that's been difficult this year, I hope, has evoked from us kindness. Two examples here, again from Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, drashing on the verse from Psalm 89, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, the world is built of your love. Some of you may know there's a song to this written by Rabbi Menachem Creditor. The world is built of your love. And Rabbi Wolbe says, take those words seriously. See the word built? Every act of chesed, or of love, even a small one, is an actual act of building and creation. The world is built of your love. Every time you do an act of love, of kindness, of compassion, of helpfulness, you are adding to the creation of the world. You are rebuilding the world in kindness. That's how powerful acts of kindness are. And without reading this whole other piece, but I need to just tell you. So, many of us bless our children on Friday nights with the words of the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, Yivarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and protect you from harm. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha, may God, you have to understand that this is all metaphoric, as if God has a face. May God's face bring light to you. Ya'er Hashem panav elecha. May God bring the light of God's face to you. So Rabbi Wolbe says, we're created in the image of God. Remember that from the beginning of Genesis? God has the capacity to radiate light with God's face. That's what we pray for our children in that blessing on Friday nights. We're created in the image of God. We also have the power to radiate light. It's reflected light. The light in our faces is light reflected from God. We have the choice of walking around our lives looking very busy and taciturn or angry, judgmental, or we have the choice of bringing a radiant face, a face of welcome, of kindness, of graciousness, of acceptance to the people that cross our path. Yeah, this is just the song. Here's what I'd like to do. I want to take a half a minute to summarize, take some questions and comments, and then if we still have time, I'd love to sing us out with a song. The song written by Rabbi Creditor to those words, "I will build this world from love." But for now, just remember the things that I'm suggesting has the key learnings from this year are humility, forbearance, and kindness. I'd love to hear how this all resonates for you. So I see, yes, does anyone have a question or a comment? Feel free to write them in the chat, and I'm going to sit back. Somebody else is going to field the questions, right? Or comments. Just want to share a reaction. That's totally fine.
No questions.
Could give it another minute. Sometimes it takes a minute for things to come to speech.
Yeah, this is a wonderful opportunity for you. We have Rabbi Eilberg here.
They're good lessons.
To send a link to the copies of the text. I don't have it online. What I'm going to do is send a copy of the handout to Barbara, and then Barbara, if you would be willing to share, because there's lots more good stuff there.
I would be delighted to. Thank you. I see there are no comments, but I think we would love to hear you sing. So I think I heard Rabbi Creditor sing it, so I'd love to hear you sing it as well.
If you don't mind, I want to wait just one more minute.
Mm-hmm.
Here, sometimes silence can be uncomfortable, but sometimes good things are growing in the silence.
Harry, would you like to, share the comments in the chat?
I'm going to ask a question.
Great.
My question is, do you have a book that you can recommend that talks about all the subject that you were discussing?
Yes, I mean, a really great, the best introduction to Musar study and practice that I know is called, it's by Alan Marinus. His first book was called Climbing Jacob's Ladder, and his second book is called, I'm having a brain blip, Everyday
Holiness.
Holiness, yes. That's what I would recommend as an introduction to Musar study and practice. There are many, many, many others. And for lots more information about Musar study and practice, including opportunities for online courses and so on, go to the website of the Musar Institute. It's musarinstitute.org, but something like that. There's a wealth of material, historical background, and all kinds of study opportunities and opportunities to come together in community. Like everything Jewish, this is best done in community with.
And Irish Schacter is holding up the book so we can all see it. Thank you very much.
Everyday Holiness.
Fantastic, beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Oh my gosh, right? You had Rabbi Creditor. Good. So the song will be familiar. I just wanted to go back for a second. Thank you for reminding us that we have an obligation to take from this experience of this year. Great. Thank you. Mimi Pollock has a question.
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize, reiterate that the subject that you brought to us today was just so timely, especially in this past year. I think we've all been trying a little bit harder than usual, especially with chesed, trying to be as loving as we can be to our fellow people, because it's just, we don't know what everyone has internalized. We only see what might be on the outside. And it's just, I think we've all been trying a little harder than usual. I just love the message that you brought today. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that. And I ask your prayers that we not stop. Let's not stop. being extra kind to one another. Right? Why should we stop just because we get a little less safe? Someone writing to me named Carol Greenberg. Is that my cousin, Carol Greenberg? If so, Carol, jump in. I just want to know. Or it could be another
Sir.
Carol.
And also Karen, Margie Miller would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Comment, please.
I just was thinking about this whole year with so much of what you said, and it brought to mind a tolerance that we had to own or obtain with the medical issues and how long it would take to get out of this. So if you were not a tolerant person, you really had to find a path toward tolerance. And of course, I think that spills over to every aspect of our lives. And it gave me a huge amount of time. And I don't mind being alone. I kind of live alone. Being very reflective of my place in the universe, not just my place in my immediate world, but I'm just a person. I'm one of those numbers on the screen every day on television. How many weren't affected? How many were affected? How many got their shots? How many didn't get their shots? And it was humbling. So whether it be very tangible as far as, living through political issues this year and having to just do that from afar in a Zoom world, the medical piece of COVID, there aren't that many times that we just have that time when, if you allow yourself the time, and I think you were forced to have that time this year, as much as you could be on Zoom, you weren't on it 24 hours a day, to really have some reflective time that we don't give ourselves often that opportunity to do, and to really be humbled by that and who and what we are, and to give yourself a chance to say, well, what do I bring to the table within my family and in my community? And so I, as much as this was horrible, and we all knew many people that passed, and many of us kind of went into the self-preservation mode, I think it was an interesting opportunity for many of us to really take a better look at who we are and what we offer to the planet and to the people around us.
So beautiful what you're saying. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, in Judaism, when we have a really important experience that we want to not be just a one-time experience, but we want to carry forward into our lives, we have a day on the calendar that invites us to revisit that experience. So I think, where we were, it was just around Purim. I don't know if Purim is the right time to be, contemplating these things. Though early in the pandemic, I was talking with groups of people, and a couple of people said, it kind of feels like Elul or Tishrei right now, and partly because of that there were more enforced times of reflection. We weren't running around as much and so on. So maybe it's on the high holidays every year. We need to revisit how do we make sure to not forget what we learned during this time.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Karen Seltzer had a question. I'll read it to you. During the pandemic, there's been a split of America between those who accepted the pandemic and those who feel it's a hoax or that their rights are being infringed upon when they have to wear a mask. Once the crisis winds down, how do we heal?
That's a huge question. I've spent many years of my life on issues of dialogue and peace building. So I wrote a book on this subject. I'm supposed to really know something about this, not this specific challenge this year, but the whole question of dialogue across difference. At the moment, I feel humbled by the question. Truthfully, my most honest answer is I don't know. It seems like the society's really extraordinarily fractured, as perhaps never before, at least not in recent memory. The best thing I know is that there are a number of programs, over the past 5 years in general, as the political environment heated up and got more and more ugly, There have always been a number of prominent nationwide organizations that teach dialogue, how to sit at the table and listen to people whose views are anathema to our own, because not to do so is a recipe only for, well, really for civil war, or at best for everyone to separate into their own silos and try to pretend that the others don't exist, except that the others do exist and occasionally make us furious, right? It's a recipe for, it's not a recipe for creating a healthy society. So for a long time, there have been some wonderful organizations. And my favorite one is Essential Partners, which has been teaching dialogue skills since the 1980s. In the last couple of years, there's been a explosion is a strange word, proliferation of new dialogue organizations trying to teach trying to cultivate people's willingness and their skills for sitting and listening to, listening to and speaking respectfully with people with whom we profoundly disagree. And my favorite new organizations of that kind are one called Living Room Conversations and one called Braver Angels. Those are both projects which have a kind of methodology for bringing people together in balanced groups of reds and blues, to put it, crassly, people with different political perspectives, and very much not with the desire to convince one another, but with the desire to discover the humanity in the other, and to, if not to be convinced, to at least learn how someone else sees the world so very differently than I do. And I think that's really great work. One other maybe tangent from that. There's a newish media organization called All Sides. I forget if it's allsides.com or allsides.org. They do a bunch of things now, but they were created by a progressive woman from Berkeley and a conservative Republican from, I want to say Tennessee, that might or might not be right, who came together and created a news site which aggregates news from the left, the right, and the center on particular issues of the day, like of the day of this week. It comes out, if you subscribe, then a couple times a week, you get a summary of, like, here are the three things in the news, major things in the news this week. Here's how each one was covered by the left, the center, and the right. I actually think, I very much believe that it would be good for a person like me, and I get most of my news from places like the New York Times and National Public Radio. I'm not to say that that should be the case for everyone, that that's the truth for me. I really should be also reading Fox and other outlets from a different perspective every day. I really believe I should be doing it every day, and I don't. But if you just want to tiptoe into this territory of how can I get some sense of how is it that people see this issue so differently than I do? How is that possible? To at least expose yourself to some of it. And that's kind of short of sitting face to face with someone, which of course is better. You can get it online.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have one other person who'd like to add a comment. Jerry, would you like to ask the rabbi or share your point with the rabbi and us?
Yes.
You have to unmute.
Yeah, I just, everything that you've said has been a looking inwardly, a lot of introspection. And I've felt that this whole year of the lack of physical connection has caused us all to revert to introspection and make that introspection work. And that introspection leads us to review our history, review our past, what is it, who we are. And this in turn causes reconnection. And through Zoom, we have managed to do a lot of reconnecting because we don't have to physically go somewhere. It's easy. And I personally have experienced reunions. Somebody, as a matter of fact, you probably know Everett Fox, who wrote that wonderful translation of the Bible, I went to school with him, and he spearheaded a connection, a Zoom reunion of our 6th grade class. And through that, I have reconnected with my best friends from elementary school, whom we haven't seen each other in years. And we have reconnected. We Zoom every week. And beautiful. Taking that by the horn, I reconnected with another old friend. And now the same thing is happening in my college department, school department. People are reconnecting. And I find a lot of people have been doing this, reconnecting. And the Zoom tool that we've been using for shul has created a warmth, which is like, if you're sick, if you can't go out, you can still go to shul. My shul, we have somebody who left Port Washington, moved to Atlanta, Georgia, 30 some odd years ago. And through these Zoom services, she is now coming to Zoom shul from Atlanta, laning Torah for us from Atlanta. And I think that has something good come out of the pandemic? Yes. This introspective reconnection with it. We had to shelter in place and get away from the world, but because of the technology and just like when we say motzi, we thank God for the wherewithal to have the bread. We have to thank God that we have the wherewithal for this technology, which has caused this reconnection in time of turmoil.
Absolutely, and may we continue to use it well going forward.
Rabbi Eilberg, if you just want to quickly, go over the psalm, and then and I want to thank you before you say that. I want to thank you. It was very meaningful, and I think we understand all these challenges, and we can relate. And last year's theme for Torah Fund was Hesed, and I always say this is not just an annual theme for 1 year; it's part of our daily lives, and we can see that from what you've spoken about today.
I'm so glad. Excuse me for half a minute. I have a workman at my door. Excuse me.
These things.
So I guess we're here on a pregnant pause.
Yes.
Yeah, because after Rabbi Eilberg will sing the psalm, I will then call on Barbara Ezring, who's the International Torah Fund Chair. My 3-year term as Torah Fund Vice President of the region is winding down. And since July, it's a pleasure to work with Barbara. But before Barbara presents a Torah Fund message, let's hear the psalm, Rabbi Eilberg.
So I'm happy to hear that some of you have heard this already. So this is Rabbi Menachem Creditor's both verbal and musical drash on the words of the psalm that we saw before. The world, I'm going to show you, the world is built of your love. Olam chesed yibaneh. Here's his version of it. It goes like this. I suggest that everyone mute themselves and then sing. Actually, one of the things I love about Zoom is I love watching people sing on Zoom. So please go ahead and sing along with me on mute. Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai, ladadai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai, ladadai. Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai, Olam chesed yibaneh, yadadai. I will build this world from love. And you this world from love. And if we build this world from love, then God will build this from love.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Eilberg. It's a wonderful way to end the presentation. And now I call on Barbara Epstein, the International Torah Fund Chair.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It's been a pleasure to work with you over this past year and to get to know you. And I wish you much success in your new position in BQLI. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be together, biachad, with you for this Helen Cytryn Study Day. Zoom has allowed me to share this special day with you for 2 years. Helen was a model to each of us. She taught us to value Jewish education for children and for teens and for adults through her leadership in her synagogues, her sisterhoods, as a Women's League vice president, on the United Synagogue National Youth Commission, and on the National Ramah Commission. And she was a student of our Women's League Institute at JTS. I am so privileged to represent Women's League for Conservative Judaism's Philanthropy, Torah Fund, at this study day. Helen exemplified Torah Fund's commitment to the continuity of conservative Masorti Jewish education. Your support of Torah Fund and your attendance today guarantee continuing Jewish education for everyone who seeks it. Thank you so much for including me today, and it was a beautiful program. Thank you, Rabbi Eilberg and Rabbi Citron.
So thank you, Barbara, and I'll see you tonight on Zoom at our monthly Torah Fund Vice President's meeting. Our annual Helen Cytryn Study Day incorporates the annual theme of Torah Fund. As we said, it's Together Biachad, which has brought speakers and attendees from outside the BQLI region, including New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, California, to just name a few. When we meet in person, we raise funds for Torah Fund from selling raffles as well as Torah Fund written materials and accessories. And I want to thank the attendees who added a donation to Torah Fund when they registered for today's program. Our campaign still continues until June 30th. The online information is in the chat. And also you can reach out to your Torah Fund chair at your sisterhood. And I want to thank all the speakers for an enlightening and inspirational afternoon. Anise Pons, Debbie Kano Goldich, Rabbi Ellen Walnut-Fields, Rabbi Eric Citron, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, Grace Gleason, and Barbara Ezrin. I also want to thank Karen Seltzer and Fern Summer from Congregation Beth Tikva, Sherry Fox and Vicki Granick, both from North Shore Jewish Center, Terry Fields of Midway Jewish Center, who will be the incoming Torah Fund Vice President of BQLI, and Anise Pons of Israel Center for Conservative Judaism, for your help in planning and for your help today to make this a smooth program. Biachad, together we support the future of conservative Masorti Judaism, and thank you for attending today's BQLI Region Helen Cytryn Study Day.
Thank you, Barbara. We're going to keep the Zoom room open for those who would like to visit, since there was some logging in difficulties. So for those who can't stay, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon, and especially at our June 10th Woman of Achievement event. And for those who'd like to stay and chat together, please unmute yourselves and we'll be happy to visit with you. Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you for supporting Torah Fund.